on CBS Sports HQ.
Hello and welcome to CBS Sports HQ. I'm Hakeem Dermish, getting you set for the fourth set of CFP Rankings. What if I told you we only needed 4 teams in the college football playoff? Say what? Let's say Oregon, Ohio State, winner of the SEC championship, and Notre Dame. Why do we need more than 4 teams? Why mess with a good thing? Why change? Here's why. Because of chaos. We love to see it. The underdog against the favorite, the upsets and the unexpected. It's also about the opportunity. More programs get a chance. Fans get to celebrate something that actually matters after the regular season is over. The joy of seeing your team's logo pop up on a bracket and where you're playing, it's magical. Sports bring us together, so what's better than 12 fan bases getting a seat at the table? Mix a little opportunity with chaos, and perhaps you get a winning recipe. Plus, we get more college football to feast on, and for that, I'm thankful. For a quick refresher on how the 12-team format works, here's Danny Cannell.
Everything in college football is revolving around the college football playoff. So let's break it down how it all works. Let's start with the selection committee. The 13-person committee is made up of 6 current athletic directors, 4 former head coaches, 2 former players, and 1 retired media member. That committee will rank the top 25 teams in the nation every week starting in November, leading up to Selection Day on December 8th. Once those final rankings are in place, we can whittle things down to a 12-team bracket. The 5 highest-ranked conference champions are automatically invited to the party. The 4 highest-ranked conference champions will receive a first-round bye. The 5th conference champ will have to play a first-round game with their seeding determined by the committee's rankings. That leaves 7 spots up for grabs for the next 7 highest-ranked teams in the committee's rankings. The teams seeded 5 through 8 get to play an on-campus home game. When we get to the quarterfinals and the semifinals, those games will be played in 6 of the most prestigious bowl games. The Fiesta Bowl in Phoenix, the Peach Bowl in Atlanta, the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, the Sugar Bowl in New Orleans, the Orange Bowl in Miami, the Cotton Bowl in Dallas, and then it all comes down to the College Football Playoff National Championship game, which will be played this year at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta on a Monday night on January 20th. Did you keep up with all that?
Yep, we did. We got it. Thank you, Danny. And here's a look at the first round schedule. 1 game will be played on Friday, December 20th. 3 games on Saturday, the 21st. And for the teams playing in a conference championship game, they'll have 2 weeks off in between games. All right, here's a look at last week's college football playoff rankings, and they won't look the same tonight. We had chaos in Week 13. 5 of the top 15 teams lost on Saturday: Indiana, Alabama, Ole Miss, BYU, and Texas A&M. Ohio State handed Indiana its first loss of the season as the Buckeyes beat the Hoosiers by 23 points. Will Howard added a late touchdown that didn't make Hoosier fans happy. Ohio State head coach Ryan Day said, quote, "Leave no doubt." Post-game, Indiana head coach Curt Cignetti was asked if the Hoosiers should still be in the playoff.
Do you think going into this last week that you should be one of the 12 teams that's in the playoff based on your body of work to this point?
Is that a serious question? I'm not even going to answer that one. The answer's so obvious.
It is obvious. Ohio State can clinch a spot in the Big Ten Championship with a win against Michigan this week, trying to snap a 3-game losing streak to that team up north. In the SEC, 7th-ranked Alabama upset on the road against unranked Oklahoma. Jalen Milroe tossed 3 interceptions for the first time in his career, and the Crimson Tide lost its 3rd conference game of the season. Speaking of 3 conference losses, 9th-ranked Ole Miss goes to the Swamp, gets upset by the Gators 24-17. Jackson Dart and the Rebels failed to capitalize when they needed to most. 0 points on 3 red zone drives. Florida now 4-0 this season when freshman quarterback DJ Lagway plays a full game, including back-to-back upset wins against LSU and Ole Miss. In the Big 12, the Fighting Kenny Dillinghams knocked off BYU in a wild finish. Jake Retzloff tossed an interception in Arizona State territory with 1:15 left. Then Arizona State turned the ball over on downs with 1 second left. initially ruled game over. Fans stormed the field, leading to a 15-minute delay before the final play of the game. And there's a four-way tie in the Big 12 at 7-2 between Arizona State, BYU, Colorado, and Iowa State. If they all went out, it would be Arizona State against Iowa State for the Big 12 championship. All right, here's a look at the odds to reach the college football playoff. Two ACC teams are favored to get in. Miami and SMU both benefit from the SEC carnage. Alabama's odds take a hit, rising to plus 210. They have the shortest odds of any three-loss team. The road to the playoff gets a lot bumpier for both BYU and Ole Miss. BYU still has a chance to reach the Big 12 title game, but they need some help. Coming up, as we await tonight's CFP rankings, we'll break down back here on CBS Sports HQ, getting you set for the fourth set of CFP rankings. We welcome in the host of the Cover 3 podcast, Chip Patterson, and 24/7 Sports national college football reporter, Brandon Marcello. Three ranked SEC teams lost on Saturday. Alabama was in line to make the playoff, now on the outside looking in. Brandon, how far do you expect Alabama to fall tonight?
Hopefully out of the top 12. In my power rankings, I put them just outside the top 15, in fact. I mean, you don't go on the road and lose to a team with a losing record, even in the SEC, and get blown out in a game where you haven't lost like that since 1998 against Virginia Tech, an unranked team back then. You just don't do that and expect to just only fall 4, 5 spots. I dropped them 8 spots in my rankings, but if you look at it based off the committee, I expect them to probably drop them 5 or 6 spots. But at this point, they're going to be on the outside looking in no matter what when it comes to the college football playoff, and they're going to need a lot of help to be considered as a 3-loss team to maybe be that 4th team from the SEC to make the playoff.
Yeah, I've actually got them coming in at number 12 based on my prediction of what the committee is going to do. This is a college football playoff selection committee that is going to hang on to that win against Georgia in a really big way. They're going to look at the strength of schedule, and they are going to still probably have the Crimson Tide higher than I have them on my ballot for the CBS Sports 134, higher than Brandon has them in his power rankings that you can find on CBSSports.com, because this is a selection committee that I think it's going to be hard to quit Alabama. And of course, the number 12 spot does not guarantee being in the projected bracket the rest of the way. So I do think that when they show us that, they will show the Crimson Tide on the outside looking in. But I actually think that they are a Notre Dame loss against USC. Maybe SMU screws the pooch against Cal. Maybe Miami loses to Syracuse. I mean, I'm throwing out like slightly crazy, but not totally crazy results that could have, yes, 3-loss, non-conference champion Alabama finding their way into this playoff.
So you're putting a 3-loss Alabama team in over a 3-loss South Carolina team that's playing like world beaters right now, Chip. Is that what you're telling me?
Yeah, that's not what I'm doing. This is my prediction of what the College Football Playoff Selection Committee could do. And I think that that's because when you're putting those cards on the table, Alabama does have a head-to-head win against South Carolina. Yep. And I do understand that South Carolina is playing much better now than they were earlier in the season, and Alabama's playing much worse now than they were earlier in the season. But if you're making a decision over those final spots, I do think the committee which is going to want to put Alabama in, they would then be able to point to the head-to-head result and put a 3-loss Alabama in ahead of a 3-loss South Carolina team.
Yeah, I mean, Brandon, that's what's going to come down to, right? It's putting in Alabama over another ACC team, right? And then the ACC is going to be like what we heard Dabo Swinney say to us on HQ this past Saturday, that it's a Big Ten SEC Invitational.
Yeah, I think you have something there. And also just the logo. We love logos in college sports. We just love them. But at this point, I do wonder, does the committee almost take an approach like we've seen with the men's basketball tournament in the past, where they talk about what's your recent history? How are you doing in recent games? And I think it's not even an argument right now that South Carolina, as Chip said, is playing better than Alabama down the stretch. They've won 5 straight games, including a couple against top 25 teams, and they have an opportunity in the final week of this regular season to get a monumental win on the road against another top 25 team in Clemson. Meanwhile, Alabama facing Auburn at home, which is obviously not a ranked team. So in recent times, South Carolina is doing very well down the stretch. And I think much like the men's basketball tournament, since we expanded this thing with the college football playoff, why doesn't the committee look at what they've done recently? They're on a tear. They're winning. Maybe they deserve a little bit of a closer look than in Alabama at this point.
Yeah, they'll look at wins and losses early in the season, late in the season. The men's basketball committee, there's also, I don't know, Chip, they have to put 68 teams in that thing. There's only 12 getting in this one.
They have to put 68 teams in. That's the thing that they don't talk about a lot.
Right.
Yeah, they should really talk about that more. The thing about a 12-team playoff is you got to find 12 teams to put them in there.
I can put 12
in. As Dennis Dodd wrote, like, there's some mediocrity out there. Like, we don't have championship-worthy teams that are going to be competing for a championship, but you still got to fill out the bracket. So we'll come on in, 3-loss teams.
I'm okay with that, though. I'm okay with you know, teams 9 through 12 maybe not having that championship pedigree. I'm okay with that, because those are the teams that are like bracket busters. That's what we want. We want the chaos. Right now, I've got Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee in the playoff. Chip, over or under 3.5 SEC teams in this playoff when it's all said and done?
Over. We got 3 teams that are lurking, and I think the potential for one of those to join your trio is still high enough, in addition to some of the potential chaos that I mentioned. The Alabama and South Carolina would be in line there. You do have, like Brandon mentioned, the opportunity for South Carolina to go to Death Valley, record a road win against a team the committee has ranked inside their top 25. And I'm also not going to rule out Texas A&M at this point. If Texas A&M can take care of business against Texas at home and then maybe go take down the Bulldogs, they're in. Now, what happens if Texas A&M beats Texas but then loses and then they're a 4-loss team?
Out.
I don't want to get into all that, but just with 3 potential teams, I'm going to go over.
They're out.
I think if we potentially see that actually helps South Carolina, because they got that big win against Texas A&M, and they'd be able to say, we got to win against the SEC champion runner-up right now. So that's a possibility as well. And you're right, there are about 6 teams right now in the SEC still in the running for a spot in the playoff. It's incredible. You know, our colleague Dennis Dodd earlier this summer for CBSSports.com looked back in the past history since the BCS was invented back in 1998 of how many 3-loss teams we would have had in the last 26 years. And we would have had 28 teams in the playoff over that span. There was only 7 years in those 20-plus years where we didn't have a 3-loss team in there. So obviously it's going to happen. The problem is that, one, it might happen this year, but this year is what I would say inarguably is the weakest we've seen in a few years when we just talk about from top to bottom among playoff contenders. This just isn't a great year for college football when we talk about 2 or 3 elite teams. It's just not there. But the fact of the matter is we're going to have 3-loss teams in this thing, and it might as well be the first year, I suspect, because they love the SEC.
I'm an anti-3-loss team, just so you know. I'm anti. When we get to 16 teams, fine, 3-loss. But not, we can't go from not ever having a 2-loss team in 10 years of the CFP to 4, and then our first year we have 3 losses. Well, we can't be doing it. We can't just be doing that kind of stuff. Meantime, there's a 4-way tie in the Big 12 at 7-2. Arizona State, BYU, Colorado, Iowa State. If they all went out, it would be Arizona State against Iowa State for the Big 12 championship. Chip, what does the CFP committee do with the Big 12 tonight? Because we saw last week they dropped BYU some 8 spots in the rankings.
I think that BYU will stay inside the top 25. I think Arizona State will be the highest ranked team in the committee's new rankings, maybe around that 12, 13, 14 spot. But I do think we're going to also see a little bit of a cluster where maybe Colorado doesn't fall all the way out, where Kansas State is able to come back into the top 25. And you've got, 4 or 5 teams from the Big 12 that are all going to be there. The problem is none of them are going to be within striking distance of being able to get an at-large, which means that while we have 256 different permutations of ways the Big 12 title race could conclude in Week 14, we have just 1 spot reserved for the conference in the college football playoff.
Yeah, this is just, I hate all these stupid tiebreaker scenarios we've got in these super conferences now. We got rid of divisions, which is something I didn't necessarily agree with, but I can understand why the conferences did that when they talk about comparing strength of schedule and all of that. But at this point, I mean, we're 1 year into it without divisions and the super conferences, the SEC being the big one, of course, and we're all sitting here like talking about tiebreaker scenarios. Heck, it took the Big Ten 72 hours after a Saturday to figure out, Oregon is in the Big Ten championship. They clinched it. I mean, we're in weird, uncharted territories at this point. I've got a lot of ideas, guys, about how we could fix that. For one, I think it's possible. And hey, we love TV money, right, in the SEC and Big Ten. Why not do a 4-team playoff of your own in your conference to crown a champion? Because right now in the Big 12, SEC, and Big Ten, it's impossible to play every single team in your conference. So when we're putting the top 2 teams in there, it's likely going to be 2 teams that haven't faced each other or have the similar type of resume going into that game. So why not create another type of 4-team playoff in these big conferences, crown a champion that way? So really it leaves no doubt about, they didn't play this team in the schedule here, but they certainly would get a chance to play one of the top 3 teams, if not 2 of them, in a SEC or Big Ten championship of their own.
I can get behind that, Chip. What do you think of that?
I want 10-game conference schedules. I want more teams to play each other. If you're going to expand these conferences like that, have a 10, and by the way, have every conference play a 10 game conference schedule, so we've got uniformity across the board. No more of this 8-game stuff. No more of the 9-game conferences complaining about the 8 games. 10-game conference schedules. Everybody plays each other, which means we have much less tiebreaker scenarios that might come down to a coin flip or a beep beep boop boop pop pop computer ranking like we had in the Mountain West just last season.
All right. Yeah, there's all kind of improvements that will be given to the CFP committee once this year is over. We can all agree, because Chip, there's a couple fellas on your podcast that say, I don't even want the 4 team. I want a BCS. I think what you've seen, though, this season in college football has proved that it has been maybe more fun. I guess that's a measuring stick, more fun. I know there's not a measuring stick for that qualifier, but the 12-team playoff has created so much more chaos. We were talking about how the fact that every game wasn't going to matter as much. Look at last week, Chip. Did every game matter? Every game mattered.
Well, I think that what's happened in the sport, and we can talk about the transfer portal or NIL. There's a lot of reasons, but the good teams aren't as good, but there are more teams in that next tier. The word we use is compression. You know, the top has come down just a little bit, and the middle tier has come up in a way that we can even use power ratings and individualized metrics to judge the best teams in the country, the best teams in each conference against other years in college football history. And with the good teams not being as good, it is more difficult to identify the top 2 teams like we did for so long in the BCS era. So in that sense, yes, I do like the playoff. I like the fact that more teams are going to have a shot, but it's also created that scenario where our football brains, which for years have only looked at your wins and losses and not necessarily considered all these other factors. I mean, that's how we decided championships through decades of college football's history. I mean, how many times in the hypothetical who would win on a neutral field, there are so many talented teams that did not get a shot at a national championship because they slipped up once or twice along the way. And this playoff would allow them to still have a chance to win it all.
Brandon, real quickly, last word. I'll give it to you. We got to go.
Well, listen, we've been eating sandwiches forever for dinner, and now we're getting a full buffet of football right now, and I think we're gorging ourselves on it, and we're probably about to throw up on ourselves because it's a little bit too much. And as he said, we're getting some teams that are just kind of mediocre in the playoff race at this point.
Oh my gosh! If some is good, more is better. That's honestly, I love the fact that Arizona State's in here. The Fighting Kenny Dillinghams, 1 season removed from a 3-win season. Here they are playing for a spot potentially in the Big 12. I like the new blood. I don't want to be fatigued about all the logos, as Brandon was saying at the beginning of this segment. Men, thank you. As we await the rankings, Jerry Palm coming up with his projections, and when the rankings are released, we will be back with reaction from our crew. That's all coming up on CBS Sports HQ. Keep it locked.
Welcome back to CBS Sports HQ. After what was a crazy Week 13 of college football, there are a lot of people that are curious to see what the latest edition of the playoff rankings is going to look like tonight. And probably a few nerves as well. Some playoff hopefuls suffered some bad losses this past week. Let's start with Alabama, who were stunned 24-3 by Oklahoma and became a 3-loss team for the first time since 2010. They went from a likely playoff team to a bubble team. Those odds of making the playoff dropping to 28%. They now have to find a way to backdoor their way in, but as we've recently seen, even a 3-loss Alabama has a shot in an expanded field. Let's stay in the SEC because Ole Miss committed every self-inflicted wound they could in the swamp, losing to Florida. Quarterback Jackson Dart threw 2 interceptions when the big moments came, and the Rebels now have just a 16% chance to play a meaningful game beyond this coming weekend. They need a lot of things to break their way in order for that to happen. The Ole Miss and Alabama losses took them out of the SEC title conversation, but Texas A&M are still in the fight despite losing to Auburn in 4 overtimes on Saturday. Aggies need to beat Texas in their rivalry game this week to punch their title game ticket to face Georgia. And even then, their chances of making the CFP will likely hinge on beating the Bulldogs, with those odds currently sitting at just 12%. Another team that can relate to that struggle is Colorado. The Buffs, routed by CFP spoilers Kansas, now have their odds of making the playoff also at 12%. They finished the regular season versus Oklahoma State on Friday, but also need a lot of things breaking their way, a.k.a. a miracle, if they hope to have Travis Hunter and Shadur Sanders playing any more games after this week. There are 9 teams still alive for the Big 12 title, and if all 4 6-2 teams win this week, Arizona and Iowa State are in the title game. But based on what we've seen so far this season, it is not going to be that straightforward. So those are the uncertains. Here are the locks. We know Oregon and Ohio State are going to be in repping the Big Ten, and Texas and Georgia will be in repping the SEC. Now, if there's a bracket being made, our Jerry Palm has projections about it. This is the bracket based on Jerry's top 25 going into the selection reveal tonight. And with the bracket live and dynamic, Jerry's got his thoughts. And that's why we're bringing him on to HQ, because we're talking brackets. So we got to bring in our resident bracketologist, Jerry Palm. And we've got college football writer Dennis Dodd in to add his thoughts. Jerry, there was a time when we were discussing possibly maybe 5, as many as 6 teams from the SEC making it into the playoff. Now you're projecting it to be about, what, half that?
Oh, maybe 3. Yeah, I mean, Tennessee or Texas and Georgia are all looking pretty good. But, you know, they all have games to play. So nothing is guaranteed. As we saw last week, nothing is guaranteed. But, yeah, it looks like I would think a minimum of 3 are going to get in, and the favorites, of course, being Texas, Georgia, and Tennessee. But, you know, it only takes one loss to put maybe Alabama back in play. The committee does like Alabama. They show it all the time. And they'll probably still like them in the rankings this week, if not high enough to actually put them in a bracket yet.
You know, this morning I have coffee with my dad every Tuesday morning, and we were talking about this morning. And Dennis, one of the things that my dad said when we were discussing the Alabama situation, he said, Alabama always finds a way to get into these things. So how do you feel about the prospect of it being a 3-team SEC roundup into the playoff versus 4, possibly adding Alabama?
Yeah, he's right, Jeremy. I mean, I think Alabama's the only team in the BCS era since 1998 to get into the championship game without so much as winning its division in its league when the SEC had divisions. I think it was 11 and 17. So, you know, whatever chance you give them right now, it's like the old movie line. So you're saying there's a chance. It's Dumb and Dumber with Alabama because of that. Because you have 13 minds in a room and they are programmed for brands. We've seen that over the years. I've said if Indiana has Michigan in front of it, they're absolutely in, and we're not having this discussion, even though they got blown out by Ohio State. But since they're Indiana, they are humans and they think that way. Here's something to think about with the SEC that just dawned on me while we were doing this piece. What do you do? And this might be the best way for the SEC to go. What do you do if A&M wins out? They beat Georgia. Georgia's now got 3 losses, and the SEC champion has 3 losses. Tough league. Everybody has to play everybody, and they got 3 losses. It's no sure thing that Ole Miss and Alabama win their games. They all have 3 losses. Are we talking about 2 teams in?
Possibly at that
Jerry?
rate. I mean, when you're looking at it like that, Dennis, for sure.
No one's talking about that because you don't get that propaganda on certain networks about the SEC. I'm just throwing that out there. It's been a down year for the SEC the last 2 years. They didn't win the championship last year, and that league is defined as a down year. It's been a very parity-filled league this year. The SEC is better when it's top-heavy, and there are things going on at the top and winning championships. That's not happening. I think the end of this is going to be fascinating. Before I get through, I want to mention the Big 12. 256 possible outcomes to this 8-way tie if it gets to that way, and it will be an 8-way tie. It's not 9 because Tech and West Virginia play, so they will eliminate with the other one. So even if Arizona State and who was the other one? Not BYU, but Iowa State. If all 4 win out, I am told by the Big 12 guys that do their tiebreakers, that's not automatic they clinch. There are still things that can happen down ballot that would unbalance this thing. So there's very, very much uncertainty in the Big 12 and college football.
Our research department, when they put together the previews for the week, it says in the document the Big 12 tiebreaker still to come, and I imagine that's going to be multi-pages based on what you're saying, Dennis, and how this could all play out. You mentioned Indiana, Dennis. After Indiana were humbled by Ohio State last weekend, the Hoosiers' playoff hopes took a hit, with them unlikely to be in the title game in the Big Ten. But, Jerry, you think they've done enough to make it?
Well, they got a lot of help. You know, those SEC teams losing really boosted Indiana's chances of staying up high enough in the rankings. I mean, I think what we learned about Indiana this week is they're not in Ohio State's weight class. Now, most teams are not in Ohio State's weight class, but Indiana was so dominant against the first 10 teams, well, 9 actually, that they played, and they're probably going to be dominant against Purdue. That's the thing that the committee liked about them. And if they go out and put up a big number against Purdue, they're probably going to be comfortably in the bracket. And right now, the competition for Indiana seems to just be going by the wayside.
Dennis, when you look at this Indiana team, I mean, obviously they're having an historic season, but what would it mean for them historically to get into the playoff here?
Well, it should be huge, and I think they've clinched. In fact, at halftime on Saturday, when they were down only 14-7, I said, Indiana's clinched the playoff spot. Who's with me? This is before I knew any of the 3 SEC teams were going to lose. Let's look at it this way, Jeremy. In July, nobody was talking about Indiana's schedule and how tough Indiana's schedule was. They were playing Michigan, Ohio State, Michigan, which won the national championship, Ohio State, which is the runner-up or winning the Big Ten in most years, and the national runner-up, Washington. It is not Indiana's fault that Michigan is down and Washington is down. So it's revisionist history right now to say they haven't played anybody. Those teams were on their schedule. No one expected Indiana to be this good. So when you're beating teams by 30 points a game and you go into the shoe, yes, they got worked. They got worked by 23 points. But they absolutely deserve to be in this field. I don't think there's any discussion now. And thank you, SEC, for making that an absolute fact. Because if you don't put Indiana in, who the heck are you going to put in? It's not those 3 rummies that lost Saturday night. At this point, they're going to have to earn their way in, get lucky. And, oh, by the way, as I mentioned in the first go-around, let's have them win their games first. Mississippi State's not going to lay down for Ole Miss. I give Auburn an even chance against – is Alabama even going to show up in the Iron Bowl knowing they've got that much of a chance to go? And A&M and Texas is just going to be a dogfight. In the 119-game history of this league, I talked to Jackie Sherrill this week, the old coach at A&M. This is the biggest game they've played. Look what's on the line. A berth in the SEC championship game, a berth subsequently, if they win that, in the playoff, which has never been at stake here, the rivalry stakes, and a chance to move on. So this is an elimination game that's never happened before in this series. It's going to be absolutely on fire Saturday night.
And the ticket prices are reflecting that, too. I don't think you can find a ticket for less than 4 digits if you plan on going to that game. You better have some money set aside. All right, last week we got our first look at Boise State as part of the teams getting a first-round bye. Jerry, you think that that's still a solid projection?
Yeah, because I don't think the Big 12 champion is going to move past Boise State, assuming that Boise State gets to 12-1 and they're the Mountain West champion. If they get there, I don't see which Big 12 team is going to be put ahead of them given the way they are now, they're going to have a minimum of 2 losses. And it really hasn't been a great year for the league in terms of high quality at the top. I mean, it's been great for, competitiveness amongst each other, but I don't think the Big 12 champion is going to crack the top 4 unless Boise State falters and or the ACC falters. But that seems unlikely. The ACC faltering seems unlikely, but Boise State, boy, as good as they look, they're probably going to get a bye, and why not?
Dennis, did you think at the beginning of the season that we'd ever live in a world where there was a G5 team that was getting a first-round bye in the college football playoff?
Didn't really think about that. I did think before the season that because Boise State was the original BCS bracket buster way back when, in 1998, in the early 2000s, that they did have a chance. I didn't know they were this good, where their best win would be a loss, and I say that with respect. They gave up, I think, a punt return for a touchdown and a kickoff return for a touchdown and lost by 3 points at Oregon. I think that says volumes about anything you want to say about their schedule. I think they could get into the playoff and win a game or two the way they are now. But I actually did have them on my list as a team that could finish in the top 4 because we didn't know what the Big 12 was without Texas and Oklahoma. They weren't going to have that automatic team in the top 5 or top 10 because of those 2 teams. And I think it's great with what's happened at the Big 12, but Jerry's absolutely right. Boise still has to beat Oregon State at home Friday. Oregon State just got done. What's left of a Power 5 program at Oregon State just beat Washington State in an upset. So that's one to look out for, but it's at Boise. And then they have to win the Mountain West Championship game at home against a team to be determined. So that's 2 big games they still have to get in there. But I absolutely think they could have a bye in the top 4 right now.
Jerry, we have Tulane and Army playing in the American Championship game. Is there a path for another G5 team like a Tulane to get into the playoff?
Well, if Boise falters, then yes, because it's the highest ranked 5 champions. So if Boise's not a champion, if they lose to UNLV, it's probably UNLV. If they lose to someone else, then the Tulane Army winner might have a chance to be the 5th ranked conference champion. But yeah, it's not really looking promising because you're depending on a Boise State team that has had a tremendous season losing at home to either Oregon State or someone in their conference title game.
So, Jerry, you don't think there's any way that there can be 2 G5 teams in the playoff?
Not the way it's constructed this year. I mean, it is entirely possible in any given year that could happen, but there isn't a second group of 5 champion that's threatening the top 12 right now. In fact, they're barely threatening the top 20.
sports news all the time?
We've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
Big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
Find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
Today, with the support of the NFL, a new playbook is being written. One where we all play for the same team. Across 27 cities, the National Gay Flag Football League provides inclusive play for over 4,000 LGBTQ+ players and allies. Under these lights, walk-ons are welcome.
Two, one, let's go.
Ashley, did you know We Need to Talk is going into its 10th season, and we are bringing a digital show every single week.
So we're going to highlight women in sports, whether you're playing, whether you're commentating, whether you're working behind the scenes. I'm looking forward to us having the platform to lead the charge in that.
I'm so excited to talk with you every single week on We Need to Talk now.
Everyone's in for a treat. It's going to be fun.
The fourth set of college football playoff rankings are in. Here's a look at the top 12 teams. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State remain unchanged. Notre Dame up a spot. Miami comes in at 6, followed by Georgia, Tennessee, SMU, Indiana dropping 5 spots after their loss to Ohio State. Boise State up a spot, and Clemson up 5 spots to the 12th ranking. Here's a look at the projected bracket now. The top 5 conference champions will earn automatic bids, with the 4 highest ranked teams receiving a first-round bye. So, welcome to the field, Arizona State and SMU. SMU against Notre Dame. I'm sure the over might maybe in the high 50s. Both those teams averaging 39 points per game this season. Indiana, Penn State did not meet the regular season. A Big Ten battle there. Arizona State, Ohio State in Columbus. Tennessee and Georgia, of course, they met in the regular season. And, well, you know what happened there. So, how's this going to play out? Let's get some reaction. Welcome to CBS Sports senior college football writer Dennis Dodd and 24/7 Sports college football analyst Brad Crawford. Okay, the one thing that we circled when we first saw it, Brad, was you saw Notre Dame behind Penn State. You didn't like that.
Penn State, for some reason, I mean, the committee has an infatuation with this football team. The best win is Illinois. They do have a quality loss, Ohio State at home. But right now, Notre Dame behind them. Notre Dame just obliterated. It's like 8 straight opponent. Notre Dame is game control right now is just off the charts. By the way, Army was unbeaten, and now Army's not ranked because of what the Irish did to the Black Knights. So despite the quality win, Notre Dame staying at 5 is a little bit surprising to me. Since that loss to NIU, there might not be a more dominant team in college football right now than the Fighting Irish. I still think Notre Dame gets a first-round home game as long as they beat USC this weekend. But I am still surprised, Hakeem, that Penn State is at 4 and Notre Dame did not move ahead of the Nittany Lions after Penn State won by a single point on the road at Minnesota.
Notre Dame leads FBS with a plus 301 point differential entering this week. But Dennis, can you understand why the committee would do this? Because if you look at their loss, Notre Dame lost to Northern Illinois and Penn State lost to Ohio State. So if we are looking at those 2 factors, Penn State gets the 4 spot there because of that. They didn't lose to Northern Illinois. They lost to the team that's ranked 2nd in the rankings, Ohio State.
Yeah, look, if Northern Illinois was winning the MAC or was in the MAC championship game, we might have a discussion here.
They're not.
But that's hanging around their neck like a lead tire, weighing them down right now, and the committee's going to make them pay for it. Whether they win out or not, obviously against USC. I would disagree on that Penn State game being a quality loss for them. I was there, and I know it was only 7 points, but it seemed like 20. They were almost non-competitive offensively. That goal line stand, or those goal line plays that they called with 5 minutes left, were some of the most unimaginative plays I've ever seen, with the season on the line against a quality opponent. 3 runs into the line, and then you don't even take a look at Ty Warren on 4th down for an option there. So it was a game they lost by a touchdown, but it wasn't like they were going to win that game. They were up 10-0, blew it quickly on a day that Ohio State wasn't great, frankly. Neither team was. Yeah. So I don't count that as that much of a quality win. I am more surprised, and we can talk about this, at South Carolina at 15, and we talked about this off air. There's a pretty easy path for them to get into the top 12 and be considered, given that Alabama and Ole Miss are above them. I have no idea how those teams are going to come out in rivalry games this week, because they in their minds may think they've got nothing to play for. And South Carolina's playing Clemson at 12. That takes care of them. They move into the top 12 with a win if Mississippi State beats Ole Miss and Auburn beats Alabama. Am I wrong?
Clemson, though, would get to the ACC title game with a Miami loss at Syracuse.
Right.
So you could still make the argument there, if Clemson wins their conference, they are going to be in the field, because, as we know, the committee values conference championships, and they're not going to penalize you if you lose in your conference championship, because they want to avoid the whole idea of getting a bye. And every team, by the way, just so we're clear here, conference championship Saturday is December 7th. So you're going to have 2 weeks off before the first playoff game. So everybody's essentially going to have an extended bye. So whether you're arguing whether you want to plan that game to get an extra week, I don't know how much value that holds. But look, Brad, you and I have been talking about South Carolina for the last month. I don't want to play them if I'm a top team. They are playing some of the best football we've seen.
I mean, the quarterback Lenora Sellers right now is college football's best quarterback the last 4.5 weeks or so. I mean, 12 touchdowns, 1 turnover his last 5 starts. I want to get back to what Dennis said, though. I do think if the Gamecocks beat Clemson, and then maybe Clemson back ends to the ACC championship game and then wins against SMU, well, then Gamecocks have a quality win not only against Clemson, but the eventual ACC champion. But I don't know if Alabama's going to lose to Auburn. Ole Miss is not going to lose to Mississippi State. And right now, those are the 2 elephants in the room that are still ahead of the Gamecocks. In my projection, I thought the Gamecocks would be ranked in the middle of Alabama and Ole Miss. But right now, Bama and Ole Miss still being ahead of them and having head-to-head wins, that's critical. So unless the committee thinks Gamecocks are better after it went over Clemson than the 2 SEC teams right now just in front of them, I think the path is still difficult to overcome for South Carolina. But I do agree with Dennis that it went over a top 12 Clemson team, especially convincingly this weekend on the road, would have looked very, very good as a lasting impression.
South Carolina's last loss was against Alabama, a 2-point defeat. Alabama has made 8 of the first 10 college football playoffs, now on the outside looking in, as they fall all the way to 13, some 6 spots. So on the outside looking in, but certainly a chance to still get in. Brad, what do you make of their outlook of trying to get into the college football playoff? Because they're going to need to beat Auburn, and they're going to need some help along the way here.
Yeah, because a win over Hugh Freeze right now is not going to move the needle to that committee, despite, Auburn beating A&M last weekend. Bama needs help. They need maybe an SMU loss. I mean, critically speaking, the ACC being a 1-bid league gets Bama into the playoff. So Bama needs to not only win Saturday, needs to look good in the Iron Bowl, and has to have some help in front of it. But I do think if it comes down to Alabama and South Carolina as that last bid, with both those teams finishing 9-3, the win over South Carolina in October still carries weight. That's why we see Bama right now ranked ahead of the Gamecocks.
Yeah, Dennis,
and
a 3-loss Alabama team's getting in over a 3-loss South Carolina team. We know how this works.
Well, historically, Alabama's got every benefit of the doubt from the committee, going back to 2011 and the LSU rematch, 2017. Twice they didn't even have to win their division to play in the BCS and the college football playoff, and they are a living example of a brand name being stuck in the heads of those committee members. This is not a very good Alabama team compared to what they did, and it probably would have fallen off a little bit had Nick Saban stayed. But you don't know what you're going to get week to week with Alabama. They got that great win over Georgia, but they go on the road, and Jalen Milroe turns into something else. He's a Heisman winner at home. He goes on the road, and he plays like he did it at Oklahoma. I get that. But eye test, I'm just in love with South Carolina right now. Ole Miss had a chance and, stepped in the mud against Florida. I just question how motivated these teams are going to be. I mean, the only thing they've got right now is the fact that they're hovering around number 12 and something might happen. I don't know if they have much to play for. I think South Carolina in a rivalry game with those possibilities in front of it, and the way they're playing, as Brad mentioned, Lou Norris has been great. I think has a definite advantage here.
Brad, is that the path then for South Carolina? Beat Clemson, but still need a little bit of help in front. Like, are we talking about they need Texas A&M to beat Texas on Saturday? What are the dominoes that need to fall for South Carolina to get into this field?
No, I think best case scenario is we've seen the last 2 weeks like 30 crazy, chaotic scenarios go in the Gamecocks' favor. This needs to happen again. You need maybe Bama to lose the Iron Bowl. Egg Bowl going Mississippi State's favor could certainly help. What if Tennessee loses at Vanderbilt?
Yeah.
Then Tennessee's likely out, and the Gamecocks at 9-3 take that spot. So there's still some upsets to be had in the SEC, I think, for the Gamecocks. But this is such a distraction right now for Shane Beamer's team. The Gamecocks just need to take care of business, let the chips fall where they may, and see what happens with the committee. Because if you go to Clemson and hang a crooked number on a top 12 football team, the Tigers are right now, and that would be a lasting impression.
Well, we know that the committee still favors Indiana here. They fall 5 spots. They're 10th now in the latest CFP rankings. Dennis, your reaction here to Indiana falling to 10?
I wrote this a couple of weeks ago, Hakeem. I thought in the ACC and in the SEC and the Big Ten, third place was the absolute best place to be because you don't have to risk your record. You don't have to play an extra game. You can rest. That's what Indiana essentially is going to be. I know Penn State's in there as well, but that's essentially what Indiana is going to be. They could play without shoulder pads Saturday and beat Purdue. So they are in the playoff. In fact, I tweeted at halftime of the Ohio State game, is Indiana punched its ticket? Who's with me? And they got blown out 23 points to 23 points. But when you balance that with those 3 SEC teams incurring their third loss, that puts them in solidly. I think they're fine. They're not going to lose to Purdue. Purdue's one of the worst teams in the country. So I think it's just another celebration. It's just a question of whether they host or not. It doesn't look like they're going to do it now. But I would not want to play that team if I was Ohio State or anybody. I think they're very, very dangerous.
Yeah, those 3 SEC teams losing Saturday night after the Indiana loss to Ohio State was huge. I mean, A&M stubbing its toe at Auburn, Alabama at Oklahoma, and then Ole Miss losing at Florida. I mean, that was a domino chain reaction that worked in Kurt Cignetti's favor. I thought Indiana would be number 9 tonight, not number 10. It's fine either way. IU, like you said, Dennis, is in the playoff. But this is a game 38-15 against Ohio State. It was actually more competitive than that. 2 special teams touchdowns, basically, 2 swing plays. IU's D-line looked good. They played pretty well in that game, all things considered. So IU's a lock to make the playoff as long as they win this weekend.
Yeah,
and Ryan Day was doing something there at the end with that kneel down. They ran that sneak into the end zone. I don't know what the message there was, but
leave no doubt. That was the message, Dennis. Leave no doubt. That was the message.
That was a message for Michigan, I think.
Well,
more than
maybe that too, but you know how much the committee favors style points.
Yeah.
So winning by 23 or winning by less than that is not going to matter. It makes sense to say, hey, you won by 23, and then everybody's saying, well, it was 2 special teams errors. Still, the defense played better in the second half. I look at this bracket real quick. My initial takeaway, the fact that SMU and Notre Dame is projected a first-round playoff, I'm happy about that because I don't want to face either of those teams right now. Both those teams are playing really good. So if one of them knocks one of them out, fine with me as you try to get to the national championship. And here's another look at the bracket. Big game, Dennis Dodd and Brad Crawford here on CBS Sports HQ. And you can find more of their content online on CBSSports.com as well. So Tennessee and Georgia, an SEC rematch. Georgia beat Tennessee a couple weeks ago. Arizona State, Ohio State in the 12-5 game. Indiana, Penn State, a Big Ten battle at Happy Valley. Let's make that the night game on Saturday night. Can we do that? And then SMU, Notre Dame in South Bend. Again, those teams are both averaging 39 points per game right now, and they will they'll duke it out in the first round if that's what happens here as the projected bracket is out after the 4th set of CFP rankings. Coming up, the biggest winners and losers from the latest college football playoff rankings. We're back here on CBS Sports HQ. Keep it locked.
news all the time?
We've got breaking news to bring to you.
CBS Sports HQ gives you a snapshot of all the sports that matter to you.
Big news coming out of the NFL. A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
With highlights.
What a finish at the final round of play.
And in-depth analysis.
Can they three-peat? Tony Romo joins the conversation.
What can you say about this game?
When you need your sports in a snap.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
Find it on CBS Sports HQ. Streaming free anywhere you are.
The world of sports never sleeps, and neither do we.
Welcome to CBS Sports HQ Morning Buzz, Monday through Friday at 9 a.m. Eastern Time.
You can catch up on the latest storylines and highlights with expert analysis to get you dialed in.
So grab your coffee and kickstart your day off right.
With Morning Buzz only on CBS Sports HQ.
Back here on CBS Sports HQ and back to the bracket. Oh, what a thing of beauty it is. Welcome Arizona State and SMU into the dance, now into the field currently. Still got some work to do, but as you take a look at the bracket, the top four unchanged. Oregon, Ohio State, Texas, Penn State, but of course that could change. Texas needing to beat Texas A&M. The winner of that game goes to play Georgia in the SEC championship game, so Georgia could be flipping spots. They could be the projected 2 seed when all is said and done. This is far from over, but this is just the projection right now. Just a reminder, the top 5 conference champions earning automatic bids. The 4 highest ranked teams getting that first round bye, as you see Boise State eyeing a first round bye. 11 games to be played, culminating with the national championship in Atlanta. Welcome in two-time Super Bowl champ Bryant McFadden and 24/7 Sports national college football reporter Brandon Marcello here to talk winners and losers. Brandon, we'll start with you. Who's your biggest winner from the 4th set of CFP rankings?
Well, you got to look at Indiana remaining in the top 10. They're going to get in the college football playoff if they win their game here in the regular season finale against Purdue. But, of course, also I think the big winner here is Boise State, continuing to distance itself a little bit from the Big 12, which is the biggest threat to get that first-round bye, that 4th spot, that covetous 4th spot as the 4th highest-ranked conference champion. If Boise State wins out at this moment, it looks like Boise State would end up getting that first round bye, which is incredible to consider where we all started at the beginning of the season.
Well, for me, it's the Clemson Tigers. And the reason why I feel Clemson, they're the biggest winner, is because weeks ago, when they took a home loss to Louisville, we all felt like they had no shot to get into the playoffs. But because of all the chaos that has happened recently, they're sitting in a very, very nice spot to be able to get into the playoffs without playing in the ACC championship game. Because we all felt like, when you look at how the committee was valuing some teams, we felt like the ACC will only get one team into the playoffs. Now, because of the chaos, the championship team, the team that wins the championship, will get in. But with Clemson, if they can win out and beat a very, very competitive South Carolina team at home, they will get into the college football playoffs without competing for the ACC championship game. And that's something that we thought would not happen based on how the committee and how other teams were valued coming into the playoff rankings. And now it's a total different story, especially with Clemson sitting inside the top 12.
Brandon, you agree with that? Clemson is in with a win over South Carolina. It's that simple?
I don't know. I don't think so necessarily. I mean, we still have to consider here, of course, what's going to happen in the ACC championship game. And for that matter, Miami hasn't clinched right now. They still need to beat Syracuse at this point. I think it's going to affect things a little bit from the committee's perspective about how they view the ACC. But they are very well in a good position there because they get us a chance here to have another great resume win against South Carolina this upcoming week. So Clemson in a pretty good spot. And as Brian said, I mean, we were not expecting this just a few weeks ago when they lost to Louisville. So credit to them that the committee sees them in a positive light at this point.
I'm making sure SMU's in, just so you know.
Right.
SMU's got, if they continue to play the way they have, and if they can go and perhaps win the ACC championship, there's no question they'd have to be in. But the way they've played this season,
the committee weighs it a big time when you go to a conference championship game. That is seen as an extra benefit to that, and it's going to be very difficult for them to say, hey, runner-up in the ACC, you're left out for a home team that's sitting at home.
Yeah, their only loss to BYU, a 3-point loss back in September, and BYU still in the rankings. They were down 5 spots after their loss to Arizona State, down to 19 as they lose. Arizona State moving up. Arizona State is in the field, one of the teams that got into the field this week, as is SMU. All right, so, Brandon, who's your biggest loser from the latest rankings?
Right now, it's the entire Big 12. They are sitting behind Boise State for that spot to get the first-round bye as one of the top 4